Hello, and welcome to another episode of Highlights from the Hill. I'm your co-host, Jim Cousins, and along with Dr. Carol Cavanaugh, our superintendent, we bring you lots of interesting and insightful discussion with people who are working in the HPS. Hello, Carol. Welcome to our new show.
Hi, Jim. Thanks for having us today.
And who we got with?
We have a very exciting guest today. We have our new principal at the Elmwood School, David Broninger.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, well, we are excited to have you on board on our administrative team. David joined us on July 1 and has been very successfully navigating the role as the Elmwood principal this year. So tell us a little bit about sort of your professional history. How did you get all the way to Hopkinton, Massachusetts?
Yeah, it's a good question. So sort of the short history and version here is I never, for a long time, thought about the educational world. And then when I was a senior in college, I made a quick sort of shift in thinking about possibly going into teaching. And I was fortunate enough to get hired originally at Franklin High School. I was a special education teacher there for a number of years, became a team chairperson, had an opportunity to go to Canton, Massachusetts, where I was the team chairperson at Canton High School for just over 2 years. And then a position opened up as an elementary principal in the middle of the year in December. And they were sort of looking for an interim person to fill that role. And not really ever having thought about elementary life before, I sort of put my hat into the ring and wound up in the position. And within a really short period of time, found that I loved the elementary life. And I was in that role for just over, or just 9 years, actually. So I loved my time in Canton. It was great. And when the opportunity sort of arose to look at Elmwood as an option, just about a year ago at this point, it was super exciting. I loved the idea of a second and third grade building. I think that's a really great age range. It's a really great community. The more research I did about Hopkinton and just the educational values and the things that were district priorities just really felt like a great fit. And so I took that leap and was fortunate enough to land in the position. And I've loved being here ever since.
It's great. So I'm wondering about that transition from high school to elementary school. I myself spent a very long career teaching high school English, and classroom management was never really a problem. I mean, it was just something that you did. And I remember one day when I had transitioned to a central office role, I had promised a second grade teacher that I would go in and cover her classroom for a period while she went off and did something in professional development. And I think I was there for about 5 minutes and the hands kept going up saying, "That's not the way we do it. That's not the way we do it." And I thought, oh my gosh, I am in so far over my head. So I'm wondering, what was your transition like from the big kids to the little kids?
Yeah, it was very similar. Younger students are not afraid to tell you what's on their mind. They'll let you know what you're doing well. They'll let you know where you need to be different or better. But I really found that I loved it. And I sort of jokingly talked with people, coming from the high school world where you could sort of talk to kids in a different way, sort of a little bit more adult-ish. And then all of a sudden you're in a cafeteria helping to open pudding cups and zip up jackets. And so all these really wonderful things that I just wasn't prepared for, but it just brought you connections with kids in different ways. And I think the honesty is a really beautiful thing. And I really enjoy sort of talking to kids and hearing what's on their mind, because they'll tell you some really good stuff if you listen to it too. So
yeah. And tell us a little bit about your family.
Yeah, so I've been married for, I got to make sure I get this right, 15 years to my wife, Tara. And we have 2 boys. We have Patrick, who's 13, and Ben, who's actually 11 today. It's his 11th birthday. So they're in 7th and 5th grade, which is a fascinating age to, parent children. But yeah, they're great. And we're busy with a lot of, like most families, school and after school activities and sports and all that, but it's nothing better.
Sure. So when you were in Canton, make sure I have it right, were you in a K-5 school?
Correct.
And now you are in a school that is exclusively grades 2 and 3.
Yes.
Is that weird? How is it?
It's awesome. K through 5 was great in many ways too, sort of seeing the progression and sort of having that age range within a building. But, as I sort of mentioned earlier, in my personal sort of, I don't want to say comfort level, but I think in my personal, like where you really feel like it's a great time to work with students, 2nd and 3rd is like that sweet spot. Students are coming with a little bit of educational history and sort of learning some of the routines of school that kindergarten so often builds and first grade builds upon. So I think by second grade, oftentimes that's fairly well established for most students. And like you start to see them also progressing into that upper elementary range where they're starting to think a little bit more deeply and more critically about things. And it's just a really fascinating age and time to talk to kids and learn about what's going on in their world. So I love sort of being able to focus with that group in that age range. I think it's an awesome time to developmentally work with kids and help to shape the way that they think and the way that they are able to sort of go about their day. So I love it. I think the K through 5 world was great in a lot of ways too, but I'm very happy with the second and third.
So one question I have, special ed teachers are typically kind and compassionate. And you mentioned briefly how like you kind of fell into that leadership role as a principal and you loved it. But I'm curious as to like what really clicked with you, what really, from a background as a special education teacher, working with students very intensively, to the role of principal is really different, right? So I'm just curious to hear a little bit about what that felt like for you and what aspects of being a principal were really attractive to you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think on so many different levels, teaching in general is about relationships, really getting to know the people and the young people that you're working with. And from the family dynamic as well, it's really about establishing great rapport, showing that you cared for student well-being. So as a teacher and as a special educator, I think trying to prioritize that I don't want to say before, but that along with everything else that comes with that. And then I think similarly as a principal, I think if you don't have those relationships and that trust with families or with students, with staff members, I think that's like the foundational element that's just so important. So I guess in a lot of ways, I'd say like that's where I try to, lead from is that relational side.
And it's kind of a continuity of caring just on a wider scale for that.
Yeah,
now,
absolutely.
And I don't know this, so I'm asking this, right? What type of relationship with the students is the principal able to have? Like, what do you do?
Awesome question. So I think traditionally people think about, and I know from my own experience, you think about the principals you had, and I'll speak for myself, but oftentimes they were sort of that sort of stern or disciplinarian type of person. That's not who I want to try to portray myself as. I mean, there's certainly times you have to play that role. But I think trying to be present, trying to be visible, get out and say hello in the morning, walk the hallways. And, I think for any administrator, if you're out there and saying hello to kids and learning names and giving high fives and get out to recess and shoot hoops or whatever it is that you like to do, I think those are the best moments of the day. And then again, on the back end, when you have to maybe have some of those different types of conversations, if you've built those sort of relational trusts, I think that helps to do it. So I try to be visible and try to get myself out there and get to know the kids on that personal level.
But
That's it.
yeah, it's kind of interesting because while we would hope that every child's behavior was impeccably fine all day long, we know that every once in a while the sheep might go astray.
Sure.
So what do consequences look like when you're 7 years old? I think we all have those visions of that very stern principal behind a desk and you'd never want to go to the principal's office. But I think that's changed a lot.
Yeah, it definitely has. I think that's one of the beautiful things about working with young people in particular. It's at our age, so often we try to treat them as learning opportunities and learning moments. I think there's times where things become a little bit more than that because they need to be, and there has to be some learning moments that may feel more like traditional consequence. But I think, our goal is to keep kids in classrooms as often as possible when it's safe and appropriate to do so. We want students to be able to understand when mistakes are made, to do some learning that goes along with it. If repair has to be part of it, repair of harm or, through restorative measures, like we try to incorporate that. So we try to get kids talking and learning. And it's, again, probably a little bit different than if you go back a number of years where, you make a mistake and it's served with a detention or something else like that. We want kids actively engaged, but we want them learning along the way.
So what is a day in the life of Mr. Broninger like? When the kids are getting off the bus, how does your day go?
I don't know that I've had the same day twice, which makes the job really awesome.
Nice.
Yeah, and I joke with my wife often. She works from home and is often looking at spreadsheets and all of this. She's works in payroll, and I could never do that. I like going in and sort of that element and variables that you don't know what's going to come up. So I think on some level it's hard to say what a typical day is, but I always like to try to be present in the morning. I like as often as I can not to schedule myself during drop-off time so that you can get out and say hello to students and families as they arrive. I think after that, try to do a quick walk around the building, check in on classrooms or students, just sort of get a pulse for the day, see how the building is feeling. Inevitably, there's things that are on your to-do list when you start the day, so as often as possible, you try to see what you can get to. Try to visit classrooms often, try to see the awesome teaching and learning that's happening. Those are the best moments of the day, is like when you get sort of bogged down in your office doing things, getting out and seeing kids in action and seeing great work from teachers and staff that's engaging kids in really great ways. So we try to do that, each and every day. Part of it is supervision, looking in and making sure the cafeteria is running smoothly and the recess is going well. I think there's, meetings that have to happen and all of that are sort of the, day-to-day business. But as often as possible, we like to get out and see kids and teachers in action.
So you've worked in a couple of other districts, and Hopkinton, we all have our own unique cultures, I think. Now that you've been here for getting on close to a year,
Yeah.
You must have sort of a sense of our glows and grows. And when we use that term in education, those things that are like, oh, you're doing it so well. And, an area of growth maybe that you would like to see happen at the Elmwood School.
Yeah. It's crazy to think that it's been almost a year. But I think the first thing that comes to mind in terms of just the community and the school community is how deeply people care about the students and positive school experience. And that's from teachers and staff to students and families. Like the feel in the town is that we value what happens in our schools and value having students have really great experiences. And so there's so many people that support that, which is just an amazing place to work every day. That's a great feeling. And then I think, one of the things that I wouldn't even call it a grow, but I think it's something that we're really aware of and trying to do some proactive work is like the community in general is shifting and demographics and making sure that we're meeting the needs of every single student and family as we, as those dynamics shift a little bit in the town. And I think there's some professional work that happens to do that. But also, again, going back to my comment about relationships, I think like that's the sort of the bedrock. But I know like that's important work that we're going to continue to keep a lens on moving forward is, how do we have every student and family feel welcome and visible and a part of our school community, and doing that as the demographics shift in our buildings and within the town.
Just following up on that, as each school department is different, right? What do you bring, what have you thought about from your past experience that you would like to try to replicate or emulate or kind of bring into the Hopkinton community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think just speaking to that last point, the community I was in previously in Canton was facing, not quite in the same way, but sort of shifts in demographics. And so some of the work that I think we're looking to do here was some work that maybe we've started, a couple of years back in Canton in terms of thinking about how to really welcome every family and be culturally, practice culturally relevancy and making sure that we're, again, reflective of all of our students and families. So I think maybe some of those things that I've had some experience with in the past could be things that could continue to help the work moving forward.
So could you talk about that a little bit? Because you've mentioned that a few times, and you mentioned that too, that, cultural diversity and the growth in different cultures in our community is a really big thing that's really going on. So could you talk a little bit about like how that looks in Elmwood and maybe some things that are happening to accommodate and help that grow?
Sure. So within Elmwood, I think we're pretty reflective of what the community dynamic looks like. We have wonderfully diverse, and diverse, define that however you'd like to, but in terms of all different demographics, we're reflective of a lot of different people coming together every day, which is wonderful. And I think, in terms of some of the professional work that we're doing, and Dr. Kavanaugh, I don't know if it's something you've talked about in any previous conversations, but we have a tool that we're using this year with some staff members to really help us reflect upon our instructional practices, to make sure that we're thinking about cultural reflectiveness and instructing in a way that's providing access for every single student, regardless of who they are. And again, I think part of that is we want to be inclusive, we want to be supportive, we want every student to feel valued, and that is definitely some of the work that folks have engaged in it in a really great way so far. We've had some professional learning opportunities, but there's still some work to go moving forward with that as well.
And I think too that we, even as an administrative team, continue to try to educate ourselves. So, and maybe yesterday was an anomaly in that sort of process, but in the morning we had an admin team meeting where we were visited by Dr. Harpreet Singh, who is a Harvard professor and also resident, who talked to us about Sikhism and the children in our district who follow that faith. And then last night, the children at the high school, or young adults at the high school really, had sponsored the very first sort of public at the high school iftar. And so, at the end of fasting for the first or second, depending on which mosque you belong to, day of Ramadan, we all ate dinner together last night. And so I think those are the kinds of things that are even happening on a much broader level. But I love what David's saying about making sure that we are culturally responsive, even in every classroom. So I think that there is an impact on the kids, but there's still a lot of learning for the adults as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe an interesting thing too, I think, about you having a grade 2-3 school is that Hopkinton is unusual in that the sort of way we have structured our schools. Mm-hmm. So not every district has a pre-K 1, a 2-3, a 4-5. Mm-hmm. How does it feel to sort of be not have a sister school? You know what I mean? It's not like there's another K-5 school or another K-5 school where the three of you are kind of aligning your curriculum. You are the person who is receiving everyone from one school. You have 50% change every year. Yep. And then you're sending off to a school. Does that feel?
Yeah. So I'm getting used to it. Mm-hmm. And I think, the hard part with that, or one of the hard parts is again, going back to getting to know the kids and knowing them for such a short time. And then, like you said, sort of 50% population change every year. So it's a really quick window to do some of that really great work with kids. And I would say that although we don't have multiple 2-3 schools, we work really closely. I work really closely with, Principal DeBow and Principal Cotter at Marathon and Hopkins School. And so we spend a lot of great opportunities talking together, and when it's appropriate to sort of align some of our thinking, K-5, they're both incredible colleagues. And as I've transitioned into Hopkinton, they've been incredibly helpful and supportive. And we're also really fortunate with some curriculum directors and Miss Moriarty and Miss Moran, who are the director of ELA and director of mathematics K-5, who are really helpful in some of those conversations when we want to think more K-5 and more broadly. So even though we don't have sister schools per se, I think it still feels very cohesive and very supportive, which is awesome.
Yes. And I think we have a great advantage in that. So every second grade teacher, every third grade teacher, for example, are all under one roof.
Yep.
So we talk about a guaranteed and viable curriculum. This is really a district where that is very, very possible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we know that there's a new school coming.
Yes.
And we know that there's a lot of growth pressures that trigger that off. I'm curious if you've been involved in what the plans look like and stuff, and other than more space to house the growing population that we have, are there any aspects that you're excited about that you might be able to include that haven't been able to happen at the current Elmwood School?
Yeah, definitely. So to answer your question, yes, I've been part of that process. It's been a lot of learning on the fly. A lot of really great work was done before I had the opportunity to, sort of jump in with the work that the group's doing. Principal Carver, who retired and was in the position before me, I know she was part of a lot of the planning and a lot of the conversations that sort of got us to this point. So yeah, it's been awesome to learn a lot. It's definitely been a learning opportunity for me to be a part of the process and listen to the different things that need to be considered and talked about. And it's super exciting. You know, you mentioned it's going to be it's a massive building, which is going to fit the, you know, what we need in terms of space and things like that for students to do their best learning and for teachers to do their best teaching. I think one of the things we're sort of doing right now that's been really exciting is thinking about like the physical look of the building and different ways that we can incorporate elements of the town and the community, different ways that we can like reflect instructional and educational moments throughout our building, and not just in our classrooms, but like through the design of how things look and colors, and you know, whether we mark off elevation. Like this is the sort of conversations we're happening right now, and like that's really exciting from like the educational side. I don't always understand like the permitting side or the other stuff like that, but from the educational side and helping to like design how it could look and feel for kids, that's been really, really exciting. Yeah.
Right.
Yes, and I think we've had that conversation a little bit at the elementary school building committee, that, you know, you go through a process where you do talk about things like permitting and geothermal wells and what brick you'll use on the exterior of the building and what's the cost of that per square foot. And while all of that is super important work, when you actually get inside the building and start thinking about theming some of those wings so that they are reflective of sort of Hopkinton's natural landscape, and there are teachers in those meetings with us, it really starts feeling good.
Yep.
Yeah. And look, when we're in those meetings and we start asking the teachers, like, okay, help us find some of the really big ticket curricular items in grade 2 or grade 3 or grade 4, and then by discipline in ELA and then in math and then in science, they are really taking all of those pieces into account as they design the interior of the building. So, I mean, instruction is, even embedded in, you know, the design process.
Yeah. It was amazing what happened at Marathon, you know.
Oh.
It's like amazing. So it's really exciting to be waiting to see what's going to happen with the new school.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's also funny when they talk about where they put their money, because when you walk into Marathon and see the cruise shell built into the floor and it says it all starts here,
Yeah.
like you realize that costs a lot of money, but it's just so Hopkinton. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah.
Yeah.
And you see it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you encountered any issues with the old building, or like how do teachers, how do students, how does it go with an older building?
Yeah, it's probably like any older space. There's things that come up. You know, if it rains too hard, sometimes we need to put out a bucket in a particular spot to make sure we catch the rain that's coming through. But I will say overall for a building that was built in 1965, I believe, it's holding up well. I'm really glad we have the opportunity to think about a new building. I think that you know, super happy and appreciative of the community for supporting that effort. And I think, you know, the folks that have maintained the current Elmwood are doing the best they can with the building that we have. But yeah, things come up. It's an old building. It's not unexpected, I don't think. But yeah, we definitely have our things that pop up from time to time. But our custodial staff is great. Facilities staff is always super responsive. And, you know, we're making it work for the next 3 years.
Yeah, I always think that even if we say it's a building that was built in 1965, when you go in there, it radiates a warmth that I think if I were any second or third grader, I'd be really happy to call that building my home for a couple of years.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a lovely place to learn.
Yeah, I think the adults, you know, and students, but I think there's a lot of pride within that space. And so, you know, for the shortcomings of an old building, the classrooms themselves don't feel impacted. There's warmth, there's color, there's cleanliness, there's great opportunities for kids to engage there too. But yeah, as I said, I mean, I think the new building is super exciting for all the possibilities. And you know, the current Elmwood that we're in, we're going to hang on and be okay for the next 3 years there too.
Yeah.
So as you're finishing up the first year, right, kind of think back when you first started. Was there anything that surprised you? Was there anything that you hadn't encountered before, you know, from your past experience that you just like thought was interesting or remarkable or just curious?
Yeah, it's I'm not sure that I can give you a specific. I can give you sort of a general sense, but in terms of the role of principal, I think a lot of the responsibilities feel similar, but just sort of the difference in community. And so I was in a place that sort of had a certain way of thinking and doing things for 9 years, and you sort of grow accustomed to that. So in like a general sense, I think sort of learning sort of the Hopkinton expectations and just sort of getting to work with different people who have different ideas. Like those are things that, even now I'm still doing a lot of learning and listening and trying to make sure I understand things before we sort of jump in and sort of think, about any big differences or changes. Because I do think like there's differences in just sort of community and school community and community in general. And like I mentioned, Hopkinton is super supportive. The teachers are amazing. They are, couldn't ask for a better group in terms of their care for kids every day.
Yeah.
Everyone shows up with this love and, really great, great way about them. And so I think for me, it's just sort of been understanding just the way that it looks and feels here in Hopkinton. But I've received incredible support, and it's been a really awesome experience. Couldn't have asked for anything better.
Yeah. So you said community several times, which it's a big word for me. I love community, and I'm curious. At the middle school, you can see community in the clubs that are forming. At the high school, you can see community in like the dinner last night and in the way that they have clubs that interact with Project Just Because and things like that. What does community look like at that grade level at Elmwood School?
Yeah, we're really fortunate. Excuse me. We have, and it's different than my past experience as well. There are so many opportunities for kids to engage with each other outside of classroom experiences. We're currently right now doing something called We Deliver, which I've learned about, and that's a very big traditional thing that Elmwood has done, and I'm actually not sure if it happens in other buildings too, but it's an opportunity for students to write letters and for family members to write letters to their child or their teacher or whoever, but it's a way to sort of recognize great things that are happening, send a note of kindness. And then we have groups of students after school throughout the month of March that sort of operate a mini post office within our building. And so it just started last week, and the kids take it super seriously. We have kids sorting letters. We have kids putting stamps on. We have deliverers. And so throughout the month of March, letters are delivered and folks are reading them, whether you're an adult or a student. But it's just a way to connect in a very sort of different way. Excuse me. And it's just been awesome to see. And that's one example, but there's many others that I think are like that, where, you try to connect people. And
Tell about March Madness.
oh yeah, March Madness. Thank you. Yep. So
I can't let that go.
yeah, I should have led with the literacy. Yep.
I love We Deliver.
yeah.
I do too. Yeah, which is also literacy.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
But March Madness, it's another great example. And so Miss Moriarty, who I mentioned earlier, she's the K through 5 ELA director. I believe that is sort of her brainchild, but I could be mistaken there. But for a number of years, it's been sort of a set up as it's a traditional sort of March Madness bracket, as you would think about it in the basketball sense, but it's with texts and books. And so each week, classrooms across the building read 2 texts. Students vote on which text they like better, and then have some conversation to share why they think that might be so. And then each classroom votes, and at the end of each week, we announce a winner, and that text will move on. And so the bracket sort of narrows, and right before April break, we will announce the book that is our March Madness winner. It's a whole school celebration, and then the texts become available in all the classrooms. And it's just a wonderful way to get young people getting really excited about books and talking about them in the cafeteria and in the hallways. We had a school council meeting recently, and one parent shared her own child's experience, where she said, it's I don't get a lot of information from my child at the end of the day, but when March Madness comes around, like, you should hear what he's telling me about these books that we're reading. So it was really cool. So
Nice.
it's a great example.
That final celebration, the kids are wild with excitement about the book that they've chosen.
Yeah.
And even after the winner is determined, they're walking up to their buses still arguing whether or not that should have been the winner, So it's really nice to see kids talking about books.
Absolutely.
Like for weeks.
Right.
Talking about books.
Right.
Yep.
All right. Well, I'm afraid that our little half hour has sped by. So we have to thank you very much for coming on.
No, thank you for having me.
It's been great talking with you. Great chatting with you again, too, Karen.
As always, Jim, thank you.
All right.
And thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you for joining us on this episode. And we hope that you will come back for more on our next episode. Take care.